Yeah.
get going?
Yep. Sure, sure. First, I just want to start off by saying that, what I am presenting is on behalf of my own personal views and or research. It is not of that of my employer, Con Edison, storage plant would generate power, right? If there's a surge or there's a demand that's needed in that region, and the cost goes up to, maybe $50 a megawatt or $100 a megawatt, they'll want to produce as much as they can. Whereas at night, when the demand is low, and the cost for power is only $10 a megawatt to generate into the reservoir, well, then that's your difference. You could gen at $10, pump at $10 and generate at 50, which would be a delta of 40. And the only reason I mention this in detail is when they talk about, and I mean some of the energy experts and renewable experts and EVs and batteries and all that, I want you to think about something, and that is, what happens if the load curve goes away? In other words, there's no demand at day, there's no demand at night. It's all one consistent load curve. How then will a pump plant financially and feasibly stay afloat? I'm sure that there probably be some other type of incentives, maybe reliability incentives, but that delta of if you buy it at $10 and sell it at $50 is gone if the load curve flattens, right? Any questions on that concept before, because that's widely discussed, and some of these principles and basics are forgotten.
Nope, good.
Okay, and this is just an overview. As I mentioned, underground conduits, about 4 miles long, coming from the river. Two large conduits that come into the pant leg there and go into the forebay. And then you can just see, for an overview, you can see across the river, Canada, Beck plant, that's where we can import power from. So, I mean, conceivably, if the New York State and or the United States is putting a bid in at $20 a megawatt, and Canada, they've got a lot of water and they've got a lot of renewable, and geographically they benefit, right? Because I believe it's up in the upper 90 percentile as hydropower in Canada, right? So they may have more water and more power than they know what to do with. There are times where I've gone on the New York State ISO website and they're paying to get rid of the power. I know it doesn't seem possible and likely, but it happens because they need to, if they are bid into it and they're subjected to consume the water, they've got to get rid of it. There are times where it's negative coming out of Ontario, Quebec. So just, if you ever get a chance, take a look at the New York State dashboard, ISO dashboard. It's not proprietary. It is a public forum where everybody and anybody can learn about it. They actually have classes on there that shows how everything's bid, because that's being in a deregulated state. That's one of the advantages for the ISO is transparency, right? Then on the same token, so if a power plant, and we don't have to just mention the Robert Moses power plant, but if they put a bid in for $20 and another plant puts in a bid for $10 a megawatt, the $10 is going to get it. There's no, for the ISO, there's no discernment or differentiation between whether it's coming from Canada and or from New York or the United States. So they'll import it, right? I'm sure there's transmission costs that are associated with it. So I don't want you to think it's that cut and dry, but if you get a chance, take a look at what the real-time price is and where the power is being imported and exchanged from. As far as we talked about the water flows, and in detail, there are some things you need to consider, and that is, before I go into it, is tourism, right? We have in New York State and for the Niagara Falls, there is a tourist time. And if you get married and you want to go to the falls, you want to make sure that Ontario and New York State and Robert Moses Power Plant is not taking away too much water, so there's enough going over the falls so that it looks majestic, right? And people who travel from all over the world, they want to make sure that they are seeing something that is impressive. Uh, the beauty, I guess the beauty of it and the um, marvel is that uh, between Canada and the United States, with the two power plants and the way that they engineered it, the falls can stop. And if for some reason a boat were to go past a certain point and they called up control rooms, they could stop the falls. They would diverge water prior to the falls and to go on max diversion and max towards Canada, max towards the US. No water would go over the falls. And when I say no water, obviously some water is going to, but would it ground a boat? Yes, it would. So that's how powerful those water intakes are on both sides of the river, which is on the Canada side and the US side. How much water is coming down? About, on average, about 215,000 cubic feet per second, or 1.6 gallons per minute, 1.6 million gallons per minute. And I know that there's, they talk of climate change and some things, but there has been times recently where we've gotten up to, in New York State, 300,000, 345,000 cubic feet per second of water coming down the river. So that gives us more opportunity to let enough water go over during the tourist season, and generate more than enough power. And so I preface that with going into that from April 1st to September 15th, there's a treaty agreement from the 1950s, and that is between 8 a.m. and 10 p.m. A minimum of 10,000 cubic feet per second will go over the falls. From September 16th to October 31st, between 8 and 8 p.m., a minimum of 100,000 will go over the falls. And all other times, a minimum of 50,000. So when it's not that period, we can actually, between Canada and or the United States, they can take off more when it's not those tourist season times, right? Let's see. So if there's 200,000 feet, 200,000 cubic feet per second available, we have to split that. So if you need 100 going over, 50 can go to Ontario or Hydro-Quebec, and 50 can go to the United States and or the Robert Moses Power Plant. That's the way it works. There's certain agreements that they have, and it's a fair share. And if for some reason Hydro-Quebec at that time gets 75 and Robert Moses gets 25, then they owe us 25, or vice versa, right? So it's always shared equally, fairly, and equitably. And it could be payments, it could be done via water. There's certain agreements and criteria above and beyond my pay grade that made that up, and I don't know how it's settled per se, but I do know that it's settled very carefully. Let's see. So when we talk about the flow, so we're talking about if we had 50,000 cubic feet on a good day to utilize at the Robert Moses coming down those pant legs, times 300. There's the calculations on a low flow, where a typical flow, it might be about 65,000 cubic feet per second times 300 foot ahead. And that is from the to the Robert Moses power plant, the 12 units, 13 units, to the forebay is about 300 feet. And then times 0.0846. It'll give you the kilowatts. And that's how they come up with the calculation. So on a really, really good day, 80,000 cubic feet per second times 300 times 0.0846 will give you 2,030 megawatts, right? And I said that in the beginning that it was capable of running at 2675. So where can we get some additional power? And that's from the pump plant, right? If we start adding in those units, we can get up to our max of 2675. And I say our, I meant, I speak as though I still work there, but it was a long time I was there. I do not. 2675 megawatts. And the limiting factor is 4 hours. So after 4 hours, that's what is required by, we mentioned the NERC FERC. That could be a regulatory requirement, possibly, for 4 hours that they need to maintain 2675. And water is the limiting factor. They can only run 2675 for a certain amount of time, because eventually they will run out of water. That 22 billion gallons of water will go very fast. And then you're left with the max of 80,000, which is 2,000 megawatts, not the 2675. Any questions with that? A lot of calculations, a lot of information there, but vitally important when it comes to understanding the water flow and the agreement and limitations.
Oh, this is terrific. This is good information. Thank you.
Okay, great, great. And I talked about the conduits, right? And so, I was able to, an engineer shared me, and these are actually, you can find these online as well. Some of the underground conduits, they're in, I believe, the library as well. Underground conduits, there's an individual standing in it, right? So that's how large one of the conduits are. And there are two conduits going under Lewiston, the town of Lewiston.
Hey, Nick, there's a question in
Sure.
the chat from Rick Church. Can you take a look at the chat real quick
Yeah.
about the head difference?
The head difference is about, I think it's about 300 versus 100. Yes. Yeah. Why the head difference? Okay. Well, let me go back to the original picture. Okay. Here is the 70-foot drop. So at the top, if you were to walk right up here and look down, it's about 70 to 100 foot to the generator. The generators are all down here. There's 12 of them here. Whereas down the forebay, if you were to stand here and look down the penstock down to the generators, that's a 300 foot drop. So 100 foot only here, 300 foot here. Why? I'm quite certain they were probably concerned with putting 22 billion gallons of water any higher than 100 feet. That's my concern. Or yeah. Oh, no, don't, no mistake. No worries about that. It's a good question. It's a really good question, because
Well,
the head. Go ahead.
no, I was just just thinking for the reservoir, you can only build up I mean, it's just geography, right? The head difference is just how high can the water go above the forebay, and they had to
Right.
build some dams to keep the reservoir,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. There are some that in Canada that I've looked up, and they've got like 1,000 foot ahead. And so you can imagine the force. To put that into the equation, the amount of megawatts you can get out of it. So that's why geographically, even with hydro and geographically with solar and wind, it makes a huge difference. You could be at an advantage or you could be at a huge disadvantage. And if you're at a huge disadvantage, you're going to pay for it when it comes to transmission, right? Because you're going to pay all those costs to get there, the loss. Yeah, so these are the two conduits, and you can see how large they are. And this is the from 1960s, the assembling of the conduits and the outside, the water intakes. This is actually the two water intakes. So when you go to the river, and I'll show you another picture, and you see the two large structures, which are the intake head gates. These are actually the intakes, and it's important to see that. You can see maybe wood would get stuck inside there, logs, trees, and even in Buffalo, yes, on the Niagara River, ice can go inside of there, right? And so it was all engineered and designed, and this is actually inside the river. They stopped the river to do the manufacturing of the river intakes. It's amazing what they did back in the 50s and 60s. And so here is, twin underground conduits. They're approximately 66 foot high and 44 feet wide. Normal flow is 40,000 to 80,000 cubic feet per second. Peak is 105,000 cubic feet per second. Okay.
Wow. What's the velocity of the water moving through the conduits? I mean, I can
Uh,
figure it out,
I,
but
yes, it is a pretty high velocity moving through there.
yeah.
They have to do inspections every 10 years, and they send like a submarine under there, and that's one of the challenges is the water velocities in there. Good question. And this is a picture from it on the inside. It's large. It's mammoth. It's amazing. And as I mentioned to you that you've seen the intakes, right? And you saw they're large, right? A lot of things can go through there. Fish, objects, boats, tires, any type of object can go through there if it fits through there. And one of the concerns we have is obviously ice. We don't want the ice getting down to the generator, nor do we want it to bottleneck right there and stop water from flowing. Because if water stops from flowing to the generators and cuts down our cubic feet per second, then we are at a disadvantage with the amount of money that we can generate and electricity that we can generate. And say, for example, Hydro-Quebec, if they have a lot of blockage in front of their intakes and they've committed to a certain amount of power for a certain period of time and they don't deliver, they have to get that power from somewhere else. And you can imagine that it won't be at the same cost. And who's going to eat that cost? The person who bid. And that's the way it would work, right? You would have to make up the difference. And so if you bid in and you have a bunch of water that doesn't go through because of ice, you can lose millions of dollars in hours. Millions of dollars if you have a major blockage. And in the wintertime, as you can see here, it comes fast. And if it's very windy and you get a good breeze, it comes fast and it can block the river. It could block the river, and it cascades the effect. It starts the bottleneck right down before the falls there, and the water levels start to rise in the river up towards Lake Erie, and rise and rise and rise because it's bottlenecking here. And that's when you have to send out boats prior to that, because you can't really send out a boat if there's that much ice there, because they won't be able to get through that, right? I mean, that'd take them over the falls. But you have to send out boats there, so they have icebreakers, both the United States side and the Canadian side, and they kind of share and help out. It's a concerted effort between the two, and they will go up on top of big, large pieces of ice, and the weight of the boat will break the ice. And they literally drive right up on there and it cracks it. And it's called an icebreaker. And that's the purpose of it. And not only that, but they use the engines. You can see that one in the bottom left there. They may park the boat right before the intakes, and they may use the engine to push the ice away from the intakes, right? As like almost like a jet propeller pushing it away from the intakes. And so you want to keep the ice going over the falls and not going in the intakes, right? And so once it starts to bottleneck, you're at a disadvantage and you got to stay ahead of it all the time and make sure the ice goes over the falls and keeps it flowing. Any questions? And hence the ice dam, that's the reason they have the ice dam, is so that Lake Erie keeps all of the ice. The ice that's here is, it could have been that they let up the ice boom, but judging by the ice on the ground here in the image there, it's all created in the river at that time, not from Lake Erie. It is all just generated just from Lake Erie all the way down to this point. And on top of the water is a lot of ice, right? And it can get thicker and thicker and thicker. And once it starts getting too thick and bottlenecks, then you're at a disadvantage.
Hey, Nick, I just wanted to check. We're a little bit over time, so can you wrap up in about 10 minutes?
Yep. Uh, like there's logs, that's an example. That's an example of the intake.
Oh, boy.
This is an example of the penstock where it goes down 300 feet, where I said you could look over. That is from the forebay and the water going down into the generators, large 24-foot. This is the scroll case. If you were to look down inside of the generator from the penstock, water comes down into a scroll case, and you have your stator, and then your rotor will go in there. Inside of the generator and the scroll case, you'll see the bottom of the penstock and a turbine wheel. And this is a view just showing the 13.8 kV generator and the scroll case and the draft tube and the lower river. This is a Robert Moses unit. A pump plant unit would look slightly different. Actually, it would not be slightly, it'd be significantly different. Some examples of the stator and rotor and the weight. For example, the pump plant's about 72 tons, whereas the Robert Moses, the rotor is about 580 tons. That's the size difference.
Wow.
These are wicket gates that open and close to stop water or let water go through to spin the turbine. And then lastly, how does a generator work? Which I'm sure most of you on this call, it's just for clearing it up. AC generator has rotating magnets, north and south poles. As the magnet crosses the stationary windings, called the stator, they cause a rising and falling of voltage, called a sine wave. If more pairs of north and south poles are added, it changes the amount of or frequency of AC waves measured in cycles per second or hertz. So you can see there that as it rotates, it is going towards the 2, and then when it goes, the north magnet rotates again, it goes towards the 3, 3, 4, 4, and then back to 1. So you started out 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, and you can do that with more and more and increase the potential. And how else do we increase the potential is we instead of a permanent magnet coils, which you can use, but for the rotor poles, they supply a DC source, which is an exciter, and it's all electronically controlled now. By varying the DC to the rotor poles, it outputs AC voltage of the generator is controlled, and so are the VARs. So the reactive power, whether it be negative or positive VARs, that's what the exciter will do. It'll react to the current system conditions. So the hydro units are great because they can take in VARs or give out VARs, right? And watts equals horsepower, and VARs equals magnetic field divided by reactive power. And then just lastly, it just shows 3-phase generator, 120 degrees out of phase, A, B, and C phases, and a typical generator configuration. And obviously, we know that depending on the number of the poles and how fast the generator is spinning will dictate how many poles you need to have and at what speed it needs to go to get your 60 hertz, and your voltage will then be determined by the exciter for the most part. All right.
Very cool.
Let's see. This is about 48 new nuclear reactors a year for the next year. Who's going to pay for that? A lot of questions actually. Hold on here. Let me go over. Oh, vehicle electrification power requirements. Yeah. I could go on about EVs, but it's going to be quite a challenge. First of all, in the North region, I did a presentation for the PE Association just recently on EVs, and I have a whole presentation, an hour on that, and I bought one, and it is going to be a huge challenge that we have ahead of us. Who's going to pay for it? The ratepayers, obviously. And this is again my opinion. I think our electric bills are going to go up. I obviously there's investors and the government is going to be involved with it and policy change, but I talked about that demand curve. You flatten it out, and you've got to install all these EV chargers. Who's going to beef up the grid for these EV chargers and for these batteries? You can't charge all these batteries, whether they be Tesla batteries for the grid, say 5 megawatt batteries, or EVs, hundreds of thousands of EVs without beefing up the grid. And it's not just a little, we've got a lot of work to do. So there's a huge opportunity. Let's see. I'm just perusing through some of the questions. There's a lot of good questions which I can follow up with. You want my opinion on some things? I can give you my opinion on some things. My concern, biggest concern, too, is once you start introducing synthetic inertia into the grid, which is renewables, solar and wind, and batteries, you lose your relay protection, which right now we have a good grasp on, right? You talk to any expert who's out there in relay protection, and that is the largest challenge they have. They cannot protect the grid with non-spinning synthetic inertia like they do right now. So that is one concern I have about physics and the grid. Nuclear, I think nuclear, yeah, obviously it can be dangerous, but it also can be very beneficial. And who's going to pay for it? It'd be the same people that are going to pay for the batteries and the beefing up of the grid and the EV incentives and the solar incentives and the wind incentives. They had I think every coal had incentives years ago. Nuclear had incentives, so the incentives will continue on, I think. But the concern is that you need spinning inertia. You cannot defy physics. You absolutely need the spinning inertia. And you've all seen the duck curve. We've heard of the duck curve. Well, now we have and it was just written and published, and it is the canyon curve, the Grand Canyon curve. So it's not no longer a grand duck curve. The curve is huge. So whenever the clouds go over and the wind stops, we've got to pull power from somewhere. And every time that happens, you can rest assured there's a generating plant just sitting there spinning, whether it be gas or hydro or whatever else fuel, coal, nuclear, it is spinning, running nonstop to support that decreasing output. And you have to pay for that. Someone has to pay for that. They're just not going to let it. The grid can go 60 hertz plus or minus 0.05, and it doesn't take much. So you need spinning inertia. Can't say it enough. Let's see. I have solar panels on the roof. All that is annualized. Then I have a PHEV. I've done studies. My class has done studies on solar panels. I actually have solar panels, so I'm speaking from experience. I bought an EV vehicle, and it was a colossal failure. I went from charging once to New York City to 3 times in the winter, to a point where I was stuck in Pennsylvania and couldn't even charge my car when it was super cold out. Lot I have very videos, very factual, very objective information on that, so I can speak on behalf of that. So I guess what I'm a proponent of it, a huge proponent, but there's a lot of obstacles, and you can't defy physics, because when you're sitting in your car and you're charging your car and it's 10 degrees out or 0 degrees out, you need heat. I mean, I would drive home there and back in a snowmobile suit. And I'm not joking you, because I really wanted to make it work, and I wanted to do a full, thorough experiment. I lost $5,000 on the deal, and I had it for 8 months. Once it took me 5 hours and 35 minutes driving in a vehicle, a gas powered, to 10 to 11 hours in an EV vehicle. And then the one time I got stuck because my car wouldn't charge, that was it. And it was getting to a point where people were there, the chargers weren't working. I could go on with it. Where I think hybrid, small, incremental, iterative changes. Hybrid is the way to go. I have solar panels on my house. I'm a huge proponent of it, right? Without the incentives, though, my 8 year, and I hope it's 8 years, return on investment would be about 25 years. You throw in a battery and you try and a Tesla battery that costs $25,000 or $20,000, your return on investment will go to about 30 years. And one key factor that they don't tell you is those Tesla batteries, they have a certain amount of charge and discharge, and that's only about 10 years. So your 10-year life cycle, maybe 10, maybe 15, let's say 15, but your solar panels last for 30 years. You're going to have to swap out after 15 years your new Tesla batteries. Your 30-year, 25 to 30-year return on investment just went to like 40, 45 years. So that's the truth. I've done the study. I can't twist it any other way. It just is. I'm all for it. I'd love it. And I've tried, I've got it. I've done it. I'm a proponent of it. I teach it. We just have a lot of hurdles, and as engineers, we have to find a way to perfect it and not give up. We have to
Nick, I've got
be persistent.
two quick, just administrative items before everybody logs off. First, there's a quick question about the PDH credits, and I just wanted to make sure everybody knew that thanks to the good work from the Buffalo section, we can offer PDH credit for your presentation. I sent out an email with a course evaluation that is a requirement for the PDH. And so all you need to do is to fill out that course evaluation